Imagine you've lived more than half your life, and every morning you wake up wondering, can I still start over, or is it already too late? This video will show you how even the smallest step can change everything. The cost of standing still. You know what's heavier than carrying a bag of bricks? Carrying the weight of doing nothing. It sounds strange, but the truth is, standing still costs you more energy than moving forward, especially when you're between 50 and 80. Scientists call it decision fatigue, when your brain spins in circles, replaying the same worries, instead of burning that fuel on something useful. Doing nothing is not neutral. It's like paying rent for a house you don't even live in, and psychologists at Stanford once observed that people who avoided action actually felt more tired than those who took small, simple steps. Why? Because your brain doesn't shut up when you stall. It keeps nagging, whispering, what if, until the soundtrack of regret drowns out any peace you might have had. Imagine trying to sleep with a dripping faucet that never stops. That's what standing still does to your mind. Here's a simple example. Picture someone who knows they should walk 10 minutes a day. They don't. And instead of saving energy, they spend hours scolding themselves silently. The guilt eats more energy than the walk ever would. In fact, studies show inactivity in older adults is directly tied to higher stress hormones, weaker immune systems, and even memory decline. So yes, standing still actually breaks you down, but here's the twist: moving doesn't mean climbing a mountain. It can mean choosing one glass of water over soda, or standing up during commercials instead of sitting the whole evening. Small motions trick your body into waking up again. And the magic part? Once you move, regret shuts up. Suddenly your brain says, oh, you're doing something? Fine, I'll calm down. So the real cost of standing still isn't wasted time. It's the silent tax on your energy, your confidence, and your joy. And that tax keeps growing until one tiny step cancels the debt. Think of it this way: your nervous system is like a kid throwing a tantrum in the grocery store. It won't quiet down until you at least push the cart forward. The brain hates change. Ever notice how your brain reacts when you decide to try something new? It throws a tantrum like a toddler denied candy. That's not weakness, it's biology. Your brain is wired to keep you alive, not happy, and to your brain, the same old routine equals safety. Change? That feels like walking into a dark alley, and neuroscientists call this the status quo bias. Basically, your mind exaggerates the risks of change while minimizing the pain of staying stuck. That's why a simple decision, like taking a morning walk or calling an old friend, feels heavier than moving furniture. It's not because the step is hard. It's because your brain runs worst-case scenarios like a paranoid movie director. What if you get tired? What if it rains? What if your neighbor sees you in sweatpants? Ridiculous, but convincing enough to keep you glued to the couch. Here's the funny twist: your brain isn't being cruel, it thinks it's protecting you. The amygdala, that little almond-shaped alarm system, is hypersensitive to newness. It fires up stress hormones, making you feel restless or even afraid. But studies show that when people take just a tiny action, that alarm system calms down within minutes. The threat dissolves, and the brain actually rewards you with dopamine, a little well-done chemical pat on the back. Think of it like this: your brain is a dog barking at the mailman. Loud, dramatic, exhausting. But the moment you step forward and open the door, the dog realizes, oh, it's just the mail. Never mind. The fear fades as fast as it came. So when you feel that resistance, that inner voice yelling, don't bother, remember, it's not proof you shouldn't act. It's proof your brain is trying to keep you safe in the laziest way possible. And the quickest way to quiet it isn't thinking harder. It's doing something small, right now. The power of tiny steps. Picture this: you're standing at the bottom of a massive staircase, and all you can see are the endless steps stretching upward. Exhausting, right? But here's the thing, you don't need to climb them all today. Science shows that even one ridiculously small step can rewire your brain to believe change is possible. Psychologists call this the small wins effect. When you succeed at something tiny, tying your shoes for a walk, filling one glass of water, writing down a single thought, your brain releases dopamine. That's the same feel-good chemical people chase with chocolate or social media. The difference? Here, you earned it by moving forward. And dopamine is addictive in the best way. It makes you want to repeat the action. Suddenly, the mountain looks less like Everest and more like a gentle hill. Take the example of brushing teeth. Sounds basic, right? Yet for seniors struggling with depression, just brushing daily has been used as a first step toward rebuilding routine and self-care. Why? Because success breeds success. One tiny step proves you're capable. Then another follows, almost naturally. Before long, the momentum carries you further than motivation ever could. It's like nudging a parked car. At first, it feels impossible. But once the wheels start rolling, even a small push keeps it going. Your life works the same way. You don't need giant leaps, you need nudges. And every nudge matters more than the big plans you never start. So here's the secret. The smallest step you can take right now isn't trivial, it's the spark. Light that spark, and you won't just move forward, you'll ignite a fire strong enough to carry you through. Because sometimes the bravest thing isn't climbing the whole staircase. It's lifting one foot. The story of George, age 72. Let me tell you about George. At 72, he was the kind of man who sat by the window all day, staring out at the world like it had left him behind. His wife had passed away, his kids lived far, and his niece heard just enough to give him an excuse to do nothing. Every morning he would sigh, pour his coffee, and mutter the same words, "What's the point?" One day, his doctor gave him advice that sounded almost insulting. "George, just walk to the mailbox once a day." That's it. Not a gym membership. Not a diet overhaul. Just the mailbox. George rolled his eyes, the mailbox was barely 50 steps away. But he did it. Here's the interesting part, that tiny step started changing things. The first week, he grumbled the whole way there. The second week, he noticed the neighbor's roses blooming. By the third, he lingered a little, saying hello to a passerby. Within 2 months, he wasn't just going to the mailbox. He was walking around the block. He even started writing letters, because suddenly the mailbox wasn't just a box, it was a reason to move, to connect. Psychologists would call George's story a behavioral activation. It's when a small action nudges the brain out of inertia, creating ripples that spread wider than expected. In George's case, it wasn't about exercise. It was about dignity, about proving to himself he could still start something. And those 50 steps a day grew into a habit that made him smile again. George isn't a superhero. He didn't climb a mountain. He didn't reinvent himself. He just proved that one step, repeated, can rescue you from the heaviness of what's the point? And if George could find hope at 72, the question is, what's your mailbox? The 5-minute strategy. Imagine this, your to-do list feels like a skyscraper, but your energy feels like a worn-out flashlight. That's when the 5-minute rule comes in, the trick that makes your brain say fine, let's just start, instead of nope, too much. Here's how it works, you commit to doing something for only 5 minutes. Not finishing, not perfecting, just starting. Neuroscience backs this up. Once your brain begins a task, the Zeigarnik effect kicks in. That's a fancy term meaning your mind hates unfinished business. In other words, if you start wiping the kitchen counter for 5 minutes, odds are you'll keep going until it shines. If you lace up your sneakers to walk 5 minutes, you might end up circling the block. The entry point is the magic. Think about it like microwaving leftovers. You don't stand there debating whether you'll eat the whole plate. You just hit start. And once the plate's warm, of course you take a bite. The same with action. 5 minutes is enough to melt the ice of resistance. For older adults, this method is a game changer because it removes the intimidation factor. You don't need to plan a marathon, you just promise yourself 5 minutes. If it still feels hard after 5, you can stop. But here's the secret, most people don't. Once you've invested that tiny slice of effort, your brain says, well, I'm already here, might as well keep going. Here's a simple way to test it. Tomorrow, tell yourself you'll declutter one drawer, not the whole room. Or stretch for 5 minutes before bed, not a full workout. What you'll discover is that momentum builds quietly, almost sneakily, until it feels easier to keep moving than to quit. So the 5-minute strategy isn't about finishing big things. It's about tricking your brain into starting. And once you start, you've already won half the battle. Tricking your brain. Let's be honest, your brain is clever, but it's also a drama queen. It loves to invent excuses, build imaginary walls, and throw glitter on fear just to keep you from moving. The good news? You can outsmart it with little psychological hacks that feel almost like pranks. One classic trick is called temptation bundling. Pair something you want with something you should do. Example, only listen to your favorite podcast while walking. Suddenly, your brain stops whining about the walk because it's too busy enjoying the story in your ears. Another hack? Change the script. Instead of saying I have to, say I get to. It sounds silly, but that tiny word swap flips the chore into a privilege. I get to stretch my legs today hits different than I have to exercise. Here's a funny one, set ridiculously low expectations. Tell yourself, I'll just fold one shirt or I'll just water one plant. Your brain sighs in relief, oh, that's easy. But 9 out of 10 times, you end up folding the whole laundry basket. Why? Because starting is the hardest part. Once you're in motion, inertia does the rest. Science supports this mischief. Research on habit loops shows that when you create tiny, low-pressure cues, your brain doesn't trigger its fear alarms. Instead, it leans into the flow. That's why some people trick themselves by putting sneakers next to the bed. The cue is so small, the brain accepts it without protest. Think of your brain as a lazy roommate. If you ask it to clean the entire house, it'll groan and flop on the couch. But if you say, hey, let's just pick up this one sock, suddenly it's willing to play along. And before it knows it, the room looks better. So if you feel your mind resisting, don't fight harder, play smarter. Outsmart the roommate upstairs, and you'll be surprised how quickly the excuses vanish. Building the invisible staircase. Think about how buildings are designed. No one expects you to leap from the lobby to the 10th floor. You take the stairs one step at a time. Habits work the same way, except the staircase is invisible until you start climbing. Behavioral scientists call this habit stacking. It means attaching a new action to something you already do. Let's say you make coffee every morning. While the coffee brews, you stretch for 2 minutes. That's your first step. Or maybe you brush your teeth at night. After brushing, you write down one thought in a notebook. Congratulations, you just stacked a new step onto an old one. Slowly, you're building your invisible staircase without even noticing. The beauty of this method is that it doesn't require willpower. Willpower is like Wi-Fi, unreliable and quick to drop out when you need it most. But habits? They're automatic. Over time, one step becomes 2, then 5, then a routine. It's like sneaking vegetables into spaghetti sauce. Your brain swallows the change without complaint. Take Mrs. Linda, 68, who wanted to read more but felt overwhelmed. She promised herself just 1 page a night after brushing her teeth. Just one. Months later, she was devouring entire books. She didn't plan a staircase. She just laid one step down, then another, until suddenly she was higher than she imagined. And here's the punchline: most people wait for motivation before acting. But the staircase builds the opposite way. Action creates motivation, not the other way around. You don't need to see the top floor. You just need to trust that with each step, the next one will appear. So don't leap. Build. Quietly, steadily, invisibly. That's how small steps grow into a life you never thought possible. Tomorrow begins today. Here's a hard truth: tomorrow never really comes. It's always waiting, always a day away. That's why the smallest step has to start now, not next week, not when I feel ready, not when life is perfectly arranged. Because life never gets perfectly arranged. Think about it. The people who rebuild their lives after loss, after illness, after years of feeling stuck, they don't wait for motivation to magically appear. They choose a single action and do it today. And that act, no matter how tiny, rewrites their story. Psychologists call it self-efficacy, the belief that you can influence your own future. And the fastest way to grow that belief isn't with big speeches or goals written on paper. It's with one action that proves, yes, I can. Imagine planting a seed. You don't see results tomorrow. But in that very moment, life has already begun underground. One glass of water instead of soda. One phone call instead of silence. One step instead of sitting. These are seeds. And when you look back, you'll realize the garden started the day you stopped postponing. So ask yourself, what's the smallest step you can take right now? Not a heroic one. Not a flawless one. Just one step. Because today's step becomes tomorrow's strength, and tomorrow's strength becomes the future you thought you'd lost, and maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that it was never too late. It was just waiting for you to begin.